Welcome to Liquid, How CFOs Outperform. I'm your host, Tom Gavaghan. Today we are exploring the intersection of systems engineering, venture capital, and corporate finance. My guest is Marc Friend, the CEO of Sift, a pioneer in machine learning and fraud prevention, backed by powerhouses like Insight Partners and Stripes. Marc has one of the most unique backgrounds we've seen on the show so far. He started as an MIT-trained engineer working on military space projects for the Air Force, and he transitioned into venture capital for about 13 years and ultimately decided he wanted to be on the front lines. He didn't want to be on the sidelines. He wanted to get into the thick of it. He wanted to be on the playing field as a CEO. Today, we are going to talk about how companies transition from individual acts of heroism to true operational leverage, how Sift is preparing for the wild frontier of agentic commerce, where AI bots buy things on our behalf, and how he uses AI internally as a challenger to red team his own business. Marc, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. And before we get started, anything glaring I might have missed?
No, thank you for the intro and thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Cool. We're going to go through a number of topics I shared, and I guess we'll just jump right into it. Why don't you just share a bit more about Sift and what the company has been doing as of recent?
Yes, well, Sift is a leader in fraud prevention, surveying almost all kinds of commerce on the internet, e-commerce, marketplaces, iGaming, SaaS services, and fintech. And we do that as a SaaS service across the board based on machine learning. Have been around about 14 years. Recently crossed the $100 million revenue mark, brought in 6 months ago to build us and get us to the next stage.
Yeah, so you're newer to the company, but the company's been around the $100 million mark. It's a huge milestone. A lot of companies get to that milestone, but I also think that's like a threshold that a lot of companies struggle to continue to surpass, I guess. One of the things you said in our prior conversation, and it's something that has stuck with me, quite frankly, is that early stage companies grow based on individual acts of heroism. But to scale past that, you need something different. And as a CEO stepping into this environment, how do you architect the business to shift away from heroism and towards a more predictable system of working?
I guess it starts with leadership and organization. So in our case, we needed some re-architecture of the organizational structure. We needed to re-architect how we work. Prime example of that is how engineering worked. Like many companies, engineering was broken down into teams by kind of their surface area of product coverage. Things that were missing that we immediately addressed were the fact that we didn't have a team that was looking out into the future beyond what was right in front of us. So we created Sift Labs, which is the set of highly skilled data scientists and engineers who are looking at things 6 months and further out. And we also created a continuous engineering team that has no long-term commitments. They are 100% focused on bug fixes, feature enhancements, and meeting customer requests, building the rest of the team into kind of appropriate chunks that focus on certain product areas, but can swarm to meet the needs of any particular product roadmap function.
It makes sense, especially again, based on kind of this inflection point in this growth opportunity that you have to kind of continue to scale and multiply with what you're doing. But I think one of the things you were talking a lot about was about operational leverage as well. Mm-hmm. When we think about SaaS over the history of it, right, 20 plus years ago, companies in SaaS, they were very low margins, but that has evolved. As the world has evolved, companies are sitting at 50% profit margins in this world now. What are the specific levers you're pulling at Sift to capture that kind of margin evolution?
All businesses rely on getting some form of operational leverage to drive to profits. That can be done in mass manufacturing, so you're selling large volumes. It can be done at high prices in software where you have the high cost of sales and marketing. It could be done through marketing and distribution. In our case, we sell direct. We sell enterprise software. So we have a high cost of sales and high cost to reach the market. Our goal is we have generally a high margin business that requires a fair amount of professional services. We win the game by keeping customers over the long run. Right. So our customers are unique in that we often start with companies as they're growing and they're beginning to see their fraud exposure large enough that they need to address it. So these may be companies in the $50 to $100 million range. And we jump in to help them protect both transactions and accounts. And over the period of time, those companies, many of them are growing venture-backed, rapid growth, and we grow along with them. So not only we have to land the customers and be effective in sales, we have to be extremely effective in maintaining customer relationships and maintaining success in the fraud that we're blocking and the revenue we're protecting.
From a competitive landscape, what are you seeing? How are you experiencing that in the market today? Because the barrier to entry, again, I was just explaining from a SaaS perspective, right? That's we've been in that world now 20 plus years. When we think about the technology world now, barriers to entry are really much lower for people to spin up new solutions. And you, based on what you said, right, from an operating leverage perspective, retaining the customer is the real value there, really big value driver. But it's highly disruptive. I think all industries are. You guys seeing that in your space at Sift, and how are you managing it?
Well, as you mentioned, the company is nearly 14 years old, and we were born as leaders in machine learning. So elements of AI, and continue to introduce more AI and more machine
Hmm.
learning into our product. We see competitors new and old, and there are different business models. And so we compete particularly in a business model where we are partners with our customers. We provide them a very complex and capable console with which they and their analysts can help fight fraud, and we provide a tooling for them to do so. We can also provide professional services to help them run that platform. But some of the competition provides is more of black box solution and or closed solutions. Some offer insurance and actually take financial risk. We think that's an inefficient, ineffective way. And we're working with companies that they want to have control, they want to have visibility, they want to understand the fraud vectors,
Yeah.
and they want to partner in fighting them.
So, Mark, let's talk a little bit more about fraud and the business that you're in, because fraud can take a lot of different shapes and sizes, let's say. When I hear fraud in my treasury mind, I'm thinking about vendor master compromises and wire fraud things that we see hitting corporate treasury. Your world in Sift is a bit different, I think. You gave me the example of like working with a Hertz or something like that. When if a fraudster gets through the online portal, it's not just the $500 rental charge that is potentially at risk. It's the $60,000 vehicle that person now has access to. That's a part of the risk there. That's a part of the fraud, right? When you measure your success, you talk about acceptance rates, though, not just how many people you end up blocking, but acceptance rates. So, how should a CFO look at fraud technology as a revenue enabler rather than just a defensive cost center or like an insurance policy almost?
Well, your example is exactly right. And what we're doing is we're enabling, revenue growth without the fear of fraud. Customers have the opportunity to decide dynamically how much friction to put between their customer and a transaction. And it's not binary. It's not always clear. There are certainly bad actors that we can block at the doorsteps. There are good actors and known participants that we can let through immediately. And there are people in the gray zone where you, as a vendor, might want to send a one-time password or have other two-factor authentication. And so we help our customers, decide exactly how much friction to have in their transactions so they can control the level of fraud. And this is measured in basis points or hundredths of a percent, and improve the acceptance rates of transactions through the credit card processors or their online systems.
In this, you're living in the world of agentic commerce now, but I think, and I talked about that at the intro, but I think before we kind of double click into that, what is agentic commerce for those that aren't aware of that term, perhaps?
We're getting used to agents in most of our work. We're used to searching and shopping via Google and other search algorithms. And the idea of agentic commerce is that instead of searching, I want an agent, a Claude, an OpenAI, to go out and find me the best patio furniture that I'm shopping for, of certain dimension, of certain make, of certain size, pricing. I like certain vendors. I need it delivered by a certain date. Go out and do it. And in the future, that will be a query or a prompt that we can provide, and our agents will go out and find out, who the best vendor is, what exactly the best product is, and go out and procure it for me. There are a lot of hurdles before we get there. We're not there yet, and I think it will be a bit of time before the big players and notably the credit card processors decide how we're going to handle this, who takes the risk in a transaction. Notably, when I come back to a merchant and say, I didn't authorize my agent to do that. I was just talking to my agent. I mean, that's a kind of fraud that we don't think about so much, but forms of what we call friendly fraud, where it's not necessarily bad guys, but it's just bad behavior by generally good people. So when you have an agent behaving on your behalf, who's to decide what's good behavior and bad behavior? That's a hard question to answer today. And who's going to take the risk of that is not decided.
It's not decided. Do you have a certain leaning in terms of like who does carry that risk? If my agent is interacting with another agent and procuring something on my behalf, but it is done in a fraudulent way, am I the human? Am I holding liability? Is it the agent, the technology my agent's using? Is that holding the liability? I can't. I don't know. I could argue either or all
Yeah,
of it.
no, I think at the end of the day, we'll find that the processors, the Visa and MasterCards will end up not taking the risk where they do take some risks today.
Yeah.
The merchants will likely bear the risk, but we have to find means of authenticating the agents, the agency that they've been given by the owner, by the end user like me,
Yeah.
and probably for the near term, some form of two-factor authentication that before
Yeah.
transaction happens, that an individual, an actual user is contacted and said, and verified, yes, I've given my agent the go ahead. I don't see any way around that for now. But if you're having an agent do all the work for you and go out and procure, having a one-time password or an email or a call to verify, that's pretty low effort on my behalf.
Yeah. I think it's very topical. I think it's a great example of the world in the evolution of what we're living in. I think within our seats on our side from a financial technology perspective and in our world of treasury, it's very focused on the next level of AI on the execution side, whether it's executing a payment, executing a trade, executing a sweep, an investment. That world is here technologically. The appetite is a bit disparate between those that are tolerant of it and those that aren't, but it always is leading to that human in the loop, human on the loop, right type of mentality in terms of approaching and utilizing AI, which is now going to become part of, I think, our own, let's call it the retail user kind of experience as well. The more AI kind of is getting adopted at that level.
I think that's right. I think in things like portfolio management, financial services is a great example. Treasury departments, where wealth managers, where portfolio managers are using AI to build the perfect a bundle of stocks or the right transactions. They're taking the risk. They've been
Yeah.
using algorithms for decades. They understand how to control these mechanisms,
Hmm.
and it's not left to the consumer. The consumer
Yeah.
may or may not be at the end, or maybe the benefactor of a better portfolio or better portfolio management. It's the professionals who are using the tool sets. When we give these tool sets to the consumer, right, the world changes dramatically.
Well, yeah, and we're gonna learn a lot more. We're gonna do a lot more to learn. I would say when it comes to that side of things. But it is all of those humans and or the widespread use now of these types of things that is leading to greater amounts of data. And I think that's a fundamental piece of Sift and the value that you bring. It's a tremendous amount of data and it signals to feed your kind of core product as you talked about being kind of machine learning led. Operationally, you are doing something I think pretty fascinating internally using AI as a challenger, which you have talked about. I love this concept and I've adopted it myself in terms of leveraging AI to kind of help me and coach me or challenge me in terms of certain directions, certain thoughts, certain vision, perhaps in a way. You use AI agents to challenge sales presentations or point out weaknesses. How do you cultivate that culture where AI isn't just generating content for you, but actively kind of let's call it stress testing the work you're doing.
That's a great question. Let's unpack that. You said something very early on in analyzing large amounts of data, and first and foremost, we're using AI and bringing AI into the product, where we have thousands of signals that we use to determine a risk score for certain events. Every time you log in, every time you want to transact, and customers want to know not only what the risk score of a transaction is, or of a known email address or known mailing address, billing address, et cetera. They want to know why. And to enable to just take in that amount of data and create known signal, that takes AI. And so we're putting AI into our product more and more. In operations, and frankly, I got the suggestion from Insight Partners at an AI symposium, that great idea to use AI as a challenger. In fact, best practices, even in coding, is that you will have AI create, whether it's, a piece of code or a presentation or what have you, and you will have AI as a challenger review what it is has been created. So, in code review, it's pretty straightforward, but we use it for things, for example, yes, like when we're going to market with new messaging, or a particular presentation or thought process or approach to a vertical market, I'll use AI tools to challenge how are we communicating? How is what we communicate verified by our website? How does our website stand out versus the competition? How much of it is kind of internal jargon versus industry accepted
Yeah.
terminology? I mean, there are a lot of ways that you can use AI to kind of double check everything that you're doing in go to market.
Agree. And I go back also to obviously the wide adoption of it from a generation perspective. But I encourage everybody on this call to please put some extra thought and vision into what you're actually producing with AI, because it's very easy for humans to spot what is being generated without the human in the loop there as well. That can then impact how the challenger aspect of using AI can ultimately work. But yeah, you can obviously identify pretty quickly the marketing jargon and kind of bloviating kind of messaging versus what's actually real and sustainable. If I go back to kind of the Sift foundation though, and I can just challenge something there, see how you guys kind of adapt this to that, not really knowing exactly who your target market is necessarily, or let's say buyer persona. When you talk about, I agree with you, right? They want to know why that there was a signal, why there was a hit, right? How do you get behind that? And we have similar situations in the office of the CFO, perhaps by using, say, machine learning models to do things like cash predictions or forecast predictions and such like that. One of the challenges or chasms that we face sometimes is that we lived or grew up in a world, especially finance people, of math and being able to prove out certain things, whether it's I can value a stock or a trade of some sort, and there's a mathematical model behind it. Trying to do that same thing and apply that to machine learning, not very easy to do in terms of saying, well, how did I get to that output? How did you get to that result? You're predicting this cash level, and I want to report that to my CFO. Can you show me the math behind it? It's not as simple as that, depending upon specific machine learning models, right? Do you guys ever face that in terms of like having to prove the model? And what do you use? Is it just kind of constant regression testing? Is it obviously customer interactions and testimonials there that are validating those things? But how do you prove out mathematically machine learning models, I guess is maybe my question.
The machine learning has both bespoke but predictable behavior. And statistically, we can see how the models are working to dissect known good actors and known bad actors. And we get feedback from our customers. As customers are using our product, we will give them a score. They will decide this is fraudulent. When they put a label on, hey, this is a fraudulent user or this is a good user, that is feedback to our system.
That goes back
and
in.
Our system then adapts. And over time, we can see very clearly via graphical means, mathematical means, what the probability density curves are, what's the distribution curves of the scores versus the values that have been labeled. And so we eventually see the separation of good actors in good transactions and bad transactions. We know that things are going awry if for some reason there is what we call bunching, where because of the way labels are being provided, feedback is being provided, scores can bunch around a particular number, which makes it very hard to decipher good transactions versus bad. And we have ways of affecting that, and we have ways of making sure that we're getting the right feedback. So it's all based on feedback mechanisms and literally mathematically how the data is and how our decisions are showing up.
Yeah, but the feedback loop is the key piece there, is what you were saying. That inherently obviously continues to refine, I would say, the models ultimately, that they don't just become a black box, which is what we oftentimes see in the world of machine learning and technology providers around it, that it can just become a black box if it's not back testing, regression, and getting kind of that feedback ultimately. So again, I think very, very topical as certain segments of the world would become more familiar with these other ways. And not to say machine learning has been around for a very long time, by the way, but I think it's becoming more and more known and more widely adopted in various aspects of companies, specifically in finance.
I think it's really important to point out that when customers are buying software, they're looking for solutions to very particular problems. And behind the technology that answers those problems, they want the expertise to partner with. We show up not just as a piece of software, but as a piece of software and the expertise and an opinionated fashion by which we think our customers should operate. And that's what they're looking to us for.
Beautifully said. And again, that goes to, it's not just the Sift software, it's the 14 years of experience, it's the people behind it, it's the models and so on. I obviously, you're speaking to my heart there. And sorry, we got kind of really nerdy on that, I would say, and kind of dug into some philosophical thoughts of math and machine learning, things like that. But I guess that speaks a little bit to your career trajectory. So let's rewind, I guess, if we can, and kind of go through that in your path there. You were an engineer kind of background and studying out an MIT, military space projects, things like that you were involved in pretty early. So pretty interesting career arch, I would say. But you realized, like we were talking about at the beginning, that you felt like, I want to be soft here, an outsider. You kind of wanted to get into the game and onto the playing field, as opposed to, perhaps where you were before on the VC side. So how does the brain of a systems engineer, right, by kind of lineage there and foundationally, combine with the brain of a VC investor to make a better CEO, which again, I think is a very unique combination that you carry there?
Well, thank you. So it's really quite interesting, because what my MIT education did was taught me how to think and how to learn and how to think about systems. I did my master's in signal processing. So the way we look at numbers and the patterns and algorithms just kind of are in my blood. And I think business success is about replicating things that work. We say, the anecdote is, we learn from our mistakes. But in business, there's 1,000 ways to do things and three ways to do them right. And it's very hard to emulate what not to do. What we find in serial entrepreneurs is that they have found certain successes and certain patterns that work, and they play them not necessarily as a playbook, but as a pattern into their new business. And they use those patterns to their success. As a venture investor, you're also looking for patterns, right? You always hear about an entrepreneur who says, I'm going to be the Google of X, Y, and Z. I'm going to be the Facebook of A, B, and C, right? And that's very relevant, because investors are looking for patterns of success. What is an analog to past success that I believe this entrepreneur is onto something that will grow dramatically? I look at things in terms of systems and patterns. And I think in my role as a CEO and my prior roles as a CFO, is someone as a systems architect over the business, and looking at the business as a system and how we put it together to achieve our goals.
Of course, but you can take that a step further, because the way you set up a system today eventually has to be re-engineered at some point, right? As things evolve, you're at 100 million. You guys are going to hit 500 million, right? Hopefully soon, right? You're going to keep growing. But the way you're structured now, the way you're engineered at an organizational level, will that change at certain thresholds and certain activities that occur ultimately? And how do you go about doing that? And also, as a CEO, how do you also make others understand that might say, no, what got us here can get us there, when actually I personally don't believe that.
I mean, there are absolutely different thresholds that companies get stuck at. I mean, I know investors who say, hey, anyone can build a $10 million company. You could stumble into $10 million, by mistake. I don't know that that's quite true, but the challenges, first are that you design a product that people absolutely need, and then you sell it and you have some success, and you get to say, let's say 10 million in revenue. And then you have to decide, well, how do I systemically sell that in more volume to get to 25 or 50 million? You do that, and you build the teams, build the processes, and if you're lucky, you can get to 100 million. At some point, you have new layers of management, new layers of abstraction in your systems. You have less direct communication with all of the people in your company. So you have to have systems of record and reporting. And to me, it comes down to process, documentation, and cadence. You have to turn best practices into processes that are written down, so that when I say them and someone hears them, they are the same. And then you have to build a cadence around which you operate these processes. And cadence and timing and feedback are just critical. At the end of the day, people come to work, they want to win. They don't know if they've won or lost without a scorecard. Every team, every function has maybe a different cadence. Sales has quarterly cadence, right? At
Yeah.
the end of the quarter, I know if I've met my quota or not. Other teams have 2-week sprints in engineering.
Yeah. Mhm.
We create systems, we build processes, we document them, and that's our means of expanding them to the entire company. And then we build a cadence around them to be successful and continuously offer feedback.
But that goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, which again stuck to me when we talked first, was the individual acts of heroism. Kind of, they don't just get you to $100 million, because they'll get you to. They'll always happen. There'll always be those types of things that do kind of. I think that do occur to kind of reach these certain levels. So how do you approach this systemic way of working at an organizational level without threatening or pushing down maybe some of that entrepreneurial spirit that you want inside of the company ultimately? I think no matter what valuation you're sitting on.
Again, great question, and it comes down to human behaviors. There are some people who, even in startup and growth land, right, in private equity and growth type backed companies, there are people who like to come in, do their job, punch the card, and go home, and they feel great value in just being, a solid piece of the engine. And there are those who want to be out on the forefront. And the example that I gave for Sift is we created different teams, for example, within engineering, who have a different cadence, a different frequency, so some quarterly, some biweekly, and different levels of commitment for speed or for vision and product direction. And so different individuals with different personalities will fill those roles. And I think you have to adapt to what does your market need? In our market, we need not only to just work day in and day out, but we need to think around the corners as to what are the new fraud vectors that are going to come up and how do we protect against them.
Those vectors are evolving every day, right? There's
All the
always
time.
something new. There's always work to be done especially in your world, I would say.
Yeah.
As the technology it's like a catch-22. It's paradoxical almost, right? Because as technology advances and the technology you're using, it's also impacting and feeding, I guess, almost what you're trying to solve for. Couple of personal questions, and let's dig in a little bit more on Marc, because we just talked a little bit about that career arch. But a couple other things that stood out to me when we chatted was what you said about how one of your favorite things to do is have a couple people in a room at a whiteboard, brainstorming and ideating and kind of challenging each other together, which again resonates deeply, I would say, with myself. But how do you make sure to protect that time to coach the next generations of Marcs, right? To grow talent within within Sift, but also within your ecosystem, which I think is quite vast. How do you protect that time rather than just doing the day-to-day kind of running the business, keeping the lights on?
I think that's the secret to success. It's very, very hard to do.
Hard. Yeah.
I think one has to be very deliberate about it. And to be sure, as a CEO, I play off the different personalities, or I respond to the different personalities of my direct reports and to the team overall as to what they might need. Sometimes it's time with the CEO or time with my executive team. Sometimes it is with outside resources in training or coaching or what have you. We recently went through a study of our customer experience, mapping out the experience from start to finish to really understand how do we redefine our surface area of where we interact with the customer from the beginning of the sale through the end of the sale, through the onboarding, through the adoption, through finding the first bad guy, through fighting a fire drill and proving value. We have to engineer exactly how that works along the way. There's creativity involved. There's execution involved. There are different skill sets and different mentalities that need to be utilized. And I think the key is to be able to offer individuals the ability to grow into those various roles that are more execution driven, roles that are managerial, roles that are more strategic. We are looking for great talent in all of those dimensions.
Obviously, I would say a key virtue and attribute to a leader ultimately, which I guess would go to my next question and relate it to the picture that's hidden behind your head there, which is a picture of the 1980 Miracle USA hockey team, and also quite topical here as we're recording, coming off of another win, or I shouldn't say another, like it happens all the time, but a win and a gold medal in this recent Olympics. But a big fan as well, big hockey guy. My Flyers are in the playoffs now, and I hope by the time this recording comes out, still advancing through. But we can maybe talk about that later. But when it comes to the movie or Brooks or anything like that, any sort of leadership mentality or any sort of kind of key virtues from that movie that you would pull out from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite movies, and certainly some great scenes. A couple of points. One is that I hold dear a very core philosophy that people are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for. And that's true in our people, that's true in our customers. We are able to drive people much harder and further than they think they can go. People want to be challenged. When I interview for almost any role, I will always ask one question, no matter the role. And that question is, what's the hardest thing you've ever done? I want to know if this person can walk through walls or run through walls as needed. Do they find obstacles and back off? Do they find obstacles and cleverly go around them? Can they go through them when they need to? What's their leg drive? I love the mentality that Herb Brooks exhibited, that, hey, we're playing a team that is much more skilled, much more experienced playing together. But we only have to win one game. We have to win this game. If you take it in business that there's the task right in front of you, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's get what we need to get out of this interaction, this sale, this customer save, this solving an engineering problem. Those times that people come together to solve something very hard are the ones that just stick with you over time, and that make people want to stay with and grow with a company. So I look to challenge people all the time.
And that also ties to like finding the talent and what you've done in the past or where you are currently isn't necessarily what maybe is what is needed for the future. When you look at that 1980s team, right, it was a different world because you weren't able to use professional players. But always the comment or the quote, and again, I don't know if Herb Brooks actually said that, but obviously in the movie, it's the name on the front of your jersey is a hell of a lot more important than the name on the back. And you can go a lot further with a group of people, and maybe bringing in the best, one guy who's the best might not actually get you where you need to be. I'd rather get 20, hardworking, kind of tough individuals together on a team for sure. Last thing, I guess, again, drawing on your unique experience because of your VC experience and sitting now in the CEO chair, and I guess to speak to our audience, mainly finance, CFO, and financial leadership, based on your experience, based on your learning and what you've drawn from, what would you say to someone on the call like who's looking to hire their first CFO? So that might be someone who's looking to hire the first CFO, or maybe somebody who's listening who's trying to become that CFO. But what would you say to someone who's starting out and kind of going to do that as a next step there?
So I think first and foremost, the CFO needs to be the key business partner to the CEO. There's the old anecdote that it's lonely at the top is really true in the world of business. When you're a CEO, you may not always feel comfortable to ask your board questions because you're supposed to have your stuff together for them. You may not be able to ask your team certain questions because they expect you to have your stuff together. Now, if you have great relationships, of course, you can be vulnerable, you can ask questions, you can be open, and I think that's the best way to operate. But there are certain things where a CEO just needs a partner, a thought partner. As a CFO, your job is to be a business architect, to be chief scorekeeper, and to be the chief confidant for the CEO. So I think if you're looking for a CFO as a CEO, look for someone that you think is a thought partner that has the intellectual horsepower and or the chemistry or the personality that works for you, in addition to the skills that are required of the role, that you can work with this person as a thought partner, working through the hard problems. That is, somewhat different than the relationship you'll have with every other of your key direct reports. If you're a CFO or you're looking to become a CFO, again, thinking about how can you be that thought partner? How do you look at business? Are you able to look at the business as a system and architect it, looking at where do we find points of leverage? How do we grow effectively and profitably, and being able to provide more than just financials to the board and to the CEO. I think in today's world, CFOs are much more like chief operating officers in decades past. I think that's what most CFOs I know really aspire to, and many become, is that number two who really understands operations. They may not have operations reporting to them, but they have a handle on all parts of the org.
Yeah, huge responsibility, either directly or indirectly. I think that's perfectly said. I think it's a perfect way to kind of end our conversation here. It's been a really great conversation, Mark, and thank you for taking us through what you've been doing at Sift, kind of your background, your experience, your thoughts in terms of organizational dynamics and leadership. If our audience wants to learn a little bit more about Sift, about you, or anything like that, any outlets there they should seek out?
And they should seek me out on LinkedIn and easily found there. Check us out at sift.com. We're excited to serve the customers that we do. We feel very privileged. We're very grateful for their trust.
Great. Well, I'm grateful for you joining the conversation here. Really appreciate it. Look forward to having you back on. Maybe we'll just go deeper into machine learning models and the mathematical proof behind them perhaps one day.
That would be fun.
I don't think we'll get a very high listen rate on that one. Thanks to everybody else for listening and tuning in, folks. Never miss an episode. Subscribe wherever you listen. I'm Tom Gavaghan, and this is Liquid: How CFOs Outperform.